Teenager in wheelchair meets injured dog. What happens next moves everyone to tears. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, and the dog attacked anyone who tried to approach. But when they looked at each other for the first time, something inexplicable happened. In that silence between two broken beings, a connection was born that changed everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The afternoon sun filtered through the dirty bars of the shelter when Mary pushed Ryan's wheelchair down the narrow hallway. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the characteristic odor of animals, hung in the air, creating a heavy atmosphere that seemed to mirror the emotional state of the 17-year-old boy. 2 years had passed since the accident that changed his life forever, and during that time Ryan had transformed into a shadow of the vibrant teenager he used to be. Mary watched her son with a heavy heart, remembering the days when he would come home sweaty and smiling after his mountain biking adventures on the city trails. Now, his eyes remained fixed on the floor, avoiding any eye contact, and his responses were limited to monosyllables at best. It was her 12th attempt to spark some interest in Ryan for any activity, and the animal shelter had been suggested by the psychologist as a last hope. "Ryan, look at all these beautiful dogs," Mary tried, pointing to the kennels where various animals competed for visitors' attention with excited barks and wagging tails. "That one looks like a golden retriever. Remember how you always wanted one?" Ryan didn't respond. His fingers drummed nervously on the armrests of his chair, a habit he had developed in recent months. It was his silent way of expressing anxiety and the constant desire to be anywhere except where he currently was. The sounds around him seemed amplified to his ears, each bark and meow transforming into a cacophony that made him want to flee. The volunteer accompanying them, a grey-haired lady named Mrs. Lucy, tried to maintain a cheerful tone while explaining about the different animals available for adoption. She talked about temperaments, ages, and stories of some of the animals, but her words seemed to run off Ryan like water on glass. "This one here is Thor, a 3-year-old Labrador, super affectionate," she said, stopping in front of a kennel where a golden dog jumped trying to reach her hands. "And over there we have Honey, a mixed breed who loves children." But Ryan wasn't listening. Something at the end of the hallway had caught his attention. In the last kennel, separated from the others by a considerable distance, there was a dark form huddled in the farthest corner. While all the other animals competed for attention, that one remained motionless, almost imperceptible in the shadows. "Mom," Ryan murmured, being the first word he had pronounced all day. Mary almost tripped in surprise at hearing her son's voice. "What is it, honey?" she asked, following the boy's gaze. Ryan pointed discreetly toward the isolated kennel. "That one over there." Mrs. Lucy followed their gaze, and her expression immediately changed, becoming more serious. That one, well, that's a special case. We don't recommend getting close." "Why?" Ryan asked, showing the first sign of genuine curiosity in months. The volunteer hesitated, exchanging a concerned look with Mary. "He was found in very difficult conditions, you know. He's been here for almost a year, but still doesn't allow anyone to approach him. It's complicated," Ryan insisted with his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, Mary saw a glimpse of the determined son she knew. Mrs. Lucy sighed, realizing she wouldn't be able to discourage the boy's interest. "All right, but keep your distance. He has episodes of aggression when he feels threatened." As they approached the isolated kennel, Ryan could better distinguish the animal's figure. It was a large dog, predominantly white coat, but marked by scars that told a story of suffering. Its ears were always alert, and its dark eyes seemed to watch every movement around it. There was no nameplate on the kennel. "What's his name?" asked Ryan, stopping his chair a few meters away. "He doesn't have an official name," admitted Mrs. Lucy. "The volunteers call him Shadow because he has a habit of hiding in the shadows whenever someone tries to approach." The dog, as if it had heard the conversation, raised its head and fixed its eyes on the 3 visitors. Ryan felt something strange happen in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if he were looking in a distorted mirror, seeing his own pain and isolation reflected back. Mary noticed the change in her son's posture. His shoulders were no longer hunched, and for the first time in months, he maintained eye contact with something other than the floor. "Ryan, maybe we should go see other animals," she suggested carefully. But Ryan didn't move. Something in the way the dog observed him was different. There wasn't the desperate animation of the other shelter animals, nor the aggression that Mrs. Lucy had described. It was a look of recognition, as if two wounded souls had found each other amid the chaos. The boy began to move his chair slowly toward the kennel, ignoring the volunteers' low protests. "Ryan, don't do that," whispered Mrs. Lucy. But something in the teenager's determination made her stop insisting. When Ryan got closer, the dog didn't flee to the shadows as it did with everyone else. Instead, it remained where it was, observing each of the boy's movements with intense attention. It was as if it were evaluating not just Ryan's intentions, but his soul. The silence in the hallway was almost palpable. Other visitors had stopped their conversations to observe the unusual scene. Mary held her breath, torn between fear of what might happen and hope of seeing some positive reaction from her son. Ryan slowly extended one of his hands toward the bars, not to touch, but as a gesture of introduction. The dog tilted its head, analyzing the movement, and then did something that no one at the shelter had witnessed before. It approached the bars. Step by step, with caution, but without hesitation, the animal moved until it was close enough to sniff Ryan's extended hand. The contact wasn't physical, but there was a palpable connection in the air. It was as if two frequencies long disconnected from the world had finally found a common tune. "I know how you feel," whispered Ryan, and although his voice was almost inaudible, the dog seemed to understand every word. The following days passed unusually in the family's home. Ryan, who for months had resisted any attempt to leave his room, began to show a different restlessness. Mary observed him from the corners of her eyes as he absent-mindedly fiddled with his phone or stared out the window with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. It wasn't exactly anxiety, but neither was it the usual apathy. It was something new. "Mom," he said on Tuesday morning, interrupting the silent breakfast that had become routine. "Can I go back to the shelter today?" Mary almost dropped her coffee cup. It was the first time in 2 years that Ryan had asked to do something. Anything. "Of course, honey. Of course you can. Did you like it there?" Ryan nodded briefly but didn't elaborate. Since the encounter with the nameless dog, he had been more thoughtful than usual, if that was possible. Mary had tried to talk about what had happened at the shelter, but his answers remained monosyllabic. Still, there was something different in his eyes, a spark she hadn't seen in a long time. The trip back to the shelter seemed shorter this time. Ryan didn't drum his fingers on the armrests of his chair, and he even attempted some superficial conversations with his mother about traffic and weather. Small miracles that filled Mary's heart with cautious hope. Mrs. Lucy greeted them with a genuine smile, although there was still a disguised concern in her expression. "Good to see you back. How are you, Ryan?" "Good," he answered, and for the first time he seemed honest in his response. "Can I see him again?" The volunteer didn't need to ask who Ryan was referring to. During the 2 days since the previous visit, she and the other staff had commented on the unusual encounter. The dog, known for its skittish behavior, had remained near the front bars of its kennel since then, as if it were waiting for something. When they reached the back hallway, the scene was even more surprising. The animal was exactly where Ryan had left it, lying near the entrance of the kennel, with its snout between its paws. Upon seeing the wheelchair approaching, it immediately raised its head, and to everyone's amazement emitted a low sound that was neither a bark nor a growl, but something that seemed close to a greeting. "Hi," said Ryan simply, stopping his chair in the same position as 2 days before. The dog got up and walked to the bars. This time there was no hesitation. It pressed its snout between the iron bars, as close as it could get to the boy. Ryan extended his hand, and when his fingers lightly touched the white fur marked by scars, both seemed to sigh with relief. Mary observed the scene with watery eyes. It had been more than a year since she had seen her son voluntarily touch anything or anyone. After the accident, he had developed an aversion to physical contact, rejecting even her hugs. Seeing those fingers carefully caressing the animal's fur was almost miraculous. "Can I stay a while?" asked Ryan, without taking his eyes off the dog. "As long as you want," replied Mrs. Lucy, genuinely moved. Mary stepped back a bit, giving her son space but remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. Not that there seemed to be any danger. The dog's behavior was completely different in Ryan's presence. Where there was once constant tension and alertness, There was now an almost meditative calm. Ryan began to speak softly to the animal, words that Mary couldn't completely distinguish, but that seemed to flow naturally. It was the longest conversation he had maintained in months, even if it was with a dog. The animal listened attentively, occasionally tilting its head as if it were processing each word. "You know," said Ryan a little louder, "I used to run too, pretty fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm still running, but now it's like I'm on a treadmill that never moves from the spot." The dog moved even closer to the bars, pressing its body against them. Ryan continued stroking its fur, and for the first time in a long time, a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You understand, don't you? That feeling of being trapped somewhere we didn't choose." Mary had to step back a little more, fighting against tears. Seeing her son finally expressing his feelings, even if to an animal, was simultaneously comforting and devastating. Minutes turned into hours. Ryan seemed completely absorbed in the dog's presence, and the animal responded in kind. Other visitors passed through the hallway, but both seemed to exist in their own bubble, oblivious to the outside world. It was when a middle-aged couple approached with a small child that the dynamic changed. The girl, about 5 years old, ran toward the kennel, screaming with joy at seeing the animals. The high-pitched sound caused the dog to immediately back away from the bars, returning to the back of the kennel with its fur bristling. "No, wait," said Ryan, extending his hand toward the animal. "It's okay. They won't hurt you." But the dog had returned to its alert state, observing the strangers with distrust. Ryan looked at the approaching family and for the first time took a social initiative. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the couple. "Could you speak more quietly near this kennel? He gets scared by noise." The woman seemed surprised, but noticing the seriousness in the teenager's voice, immediately agreed. "Of course, dear. Sorry, Maria gets very excited about the animals." "No problem," Ryan smiled genuinely. "It's just that he has a difficult history. He needs patience." As the family moved away toward the other kennels, Ryan turned his attention back to the dog, which was observing the interaction with interest. "See, some people understand. You just need to give them a chance." Slowly, the animal returned to the bars. Ryan realized he had just made his first positive social interaction in 2 years, and the feeling was strange, but not unpleasant. Mrs. Lucy approached cautiously. "Ryan, I need to tell you something about him." The boy turned to the volunteer, keeping one hand on the bars to reassure the dog. He was found in a very complicated situation. Abandoned, injured, frightened. The veterinarian said he was lucky to survive. Since he arrived here, he had never allowed anyone to get close. "You're the first person he's connected with." Ryan processed the information in silence, looking at the scars on the animal's white coat. "How long has he been here?" "Almost a year. Many interested people came to see him, but he wouldn't let them," Ryan completed. "Exactly. Until you arrived." Ryan looked into the dog's eyes and made a decision that would surprise everyone, especially himself. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Daily visits to the shelter became Ryan's new routine. Every day, promptly at 2 in the afternoon, he and Mary arrived at the location, and the dog was already waiting for them near the bars, as if it possessed an internal clock synchronized with the boys' schedule. The transformation in both was remarkable. Ryan began to talk more, not only with the animal but also with Mrs. Lucy and other volunteers. The dog, in turn, allowed Ryan to touch it through the bars and even responded to some basic commands whispered by the teenager. It was on a Wednesday in March that everything changed dramatically. One of the younger volunteers, Charlie, was filming some animals for the shelter's social media when he captured an extraordinary scene. Ryan had managed to open the kennel and was sitting on the floor, with his immobile legs extended, while the large white dog rested calmly with its head in his lap. The image was powerful. Two beings who had found healing in each other, united in a moment of perfect harmony. "Man, this is incredible," whispered Charlie, continuing to film. "Nobody's going to believe this when they see it." What Charlie didn't imagine was that those 2 minutes of video would completely change Ryan and the dog's lives. Posted on the shelter's social media that same night, the video went viral explosively. In less than 24 hours, there were more than 500,000 views and thousands of emotional comments from people touched by the connection between the teenager and the traumatized animal. The initial comments were uniformly positive. People shared their own experiences with rescue animals. Others praised Ryan's courage. Many asked for information about how to help the shelter. Mary cried with emotion, reading messages of support from across the country. It seemed that, Finally, something good had emerged from the tragedy that had marked their lives. But fame on the internet is a double-edged sword. As the video continued to spread, dissonant voices emerged. Some comments questioned the safety of the situation. "A disabled teenager with an aggressive dog," wrote one user. "That's irresponsible." Others were harsher. "This kid doesn't have adequate training to deal with a problematic animal. Someone's going to get hurt." Dr. Henry Simpson, a behavioral veterinarian with great influence on social media, shared the video with a comment that generated even more controversy. Although it's exciting to see this connection, it's important to remember that dogs with traumatic histories can be unpredictable. Safety should always come first, especially when it involves people in vulnerable situations. The veterinarian's comment was like a catalyst. Dozens of other experts emerged with similar opinions. Parents of children with disabilities expressed concern. Animal rights activists were divided between those who supported the connection and those who considered the situation potentially dangerous for both parties. Mary began receiving calls from unknown numbers. Some were journalists wanting to interview Ryan. Others were anonymous critics questioning her ability as a mother to allow her son to expose himself to such risk. The pressure intensified when a local animal protection NGO issued a statement requesting a professional evaluation of the situation. "Ryan, maybe we should take a break from the visits," suggested Mary one morning after a particularly unpleasant call from a woman who accused her of using her son's disability to gain attention. Just until things calmed down, Ryan, who was preparing for another day at the shelter, stopped adjusting the wheels of his chair. Why? Mary showed him some of the negative comments on her phone, mentally editing out the crueler parts. "Some people are concerned. They think it might be dangerous." Ryan read in silence for a few minutes, his expression gradually closing. "They don't know anything about him. They don't know anything about me." "I know, honey, but maybe they have a point. Maybe we should consult a professional, someone who understands dogs with trauma." "No," said Ryan with a firmness that Mary hadn't heard in his voice in years. "He needs me and I need him." But the external pressure continued to grow. Mrs. Lucy called that afternoon, her voice tense. "Mary, I need to talk to you. The shelter's board received some calls. There are people demanding that we prohibit the interaction between Ryan and the dog." Mary felt her stomach sink. "And what did you decide?" "We don't want to do this. Everyone here sees the good that this friendship does for both. But we're under pressure. If something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen," interrupted Ryan, who had picked up the phone extension. "He would never hurt me." "I believe you, dear," said Mrs. Lucy gently, "but I need to think about the safety of all the animals here. If we close because of an incident—" Ryan hung up the phone without responding. For the first time since he had discovered his connection with the dog, he felt truly hopeless. Not for his own condition, but for the possibility of losing the only thing that had managed to bring him back to life. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his room, thinking about the dog alone at the shelter, probably waiting for a visit that might never come again. The idea that people who had never seen them together could decide about their common destiny was unbearable. The next morning, Mary found Ryan already dressed and waiting in the living room. "Let's go," he said simply. "Ryan, maybe it's better to wait a little, see how things develop." "Mom?" Ryan looked into her eyes with an intensity she hadn't seen since before the accident. "2 years ago, when that thing happened to me, you didn't give up. You didn't abandon me even when I wanted you to. Now it's my turn not to abandon someone." Mary felt tears welling up. Her son, who had been lost in his own pain, had found strength to fight for another being who was suffering. How could she deny him this? The journey to the shelter was tense. Both knew it could be the last visit, at least for a while. When they arrived, Mrs. Lucy was waiting for them with a grave expression. "The board has decided," she said without beating around the bush. "You can say goodbye today, but after that we'll have to suspend visits until a specialist evaluates the situation." Ryan said nothing, just nodded and headed for the back of the hallway. The dog was there, as always, but this time it seemed to sense that something was different. It approached the bars more cautiously, sniffing the air as if it could feel Ryan's emotional tension. "Hey, buddy," said Ryan, opening the kennel as he had done dozens of times before. "I need to tell you something." The dog approached and lay down next to the chair, resting its head in the boy's lap as usual. Ryan stroked its fur, searching for the right words. "Some people think we shouldn't be together. They think you might hurt me, or that I'm not capable of taking care of you." The dog raised its head and looked into Ryan's eyes, as if it understood every word. "But they're wrong. We know they're wrong, don't we?" For the first time since the accident, Ryan felt tears rolling down his face. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of frustration at having found something precious, only to see it threatened by forces beyond his control. 3 weeks passed since Ryan's last visit to the shelter, and the impact of the separation was devastating for both. Mary observed with growing concern how her son rapidly regressed to the previous state of isolation, perhaps even worse. He had returned to avoiding conversations, spent entire days locked in his room, and the spark of life that had shone in his eyes during the weeks at the shelter seemed completely extinguished. Mrs. Lucy called daily with equally discouraging updates about the dog. The animal had stopped eating regularly, spent most of its time huddled in the back of the kennel, and showed signs of severe behavioral regression. It growled at anyone who approached and had visibly lost weight. The veterinarians were concerned about its physical and emotional state. It was on a rainy afternoon in April that Mary made a decision that would change everything. Unable to bear seeing so much suffering, she called Dr. Richard Andrews, the animal behavior specialist who had been hired by the shelter's board to evaluate the situation. To her surprise, she discovered that he had not yet visited the location nor observed the interaction between Ryan and the dog. "Doctor, with all due respect," said Mary, controlling the anger in her voice, "how can you make an evaluation without even having seen the two together?" Dr. Richard seemed uncomfortable. "Well, considering the negative repercussions and legitimate concerns about safety, we thought it more prudent to adopt a cautious approach." "More prudent for whom?" "Certainly not for my son or for that dog, who are both withering away separated." There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Dr. Richard sighed. "You know what? You're right. How about we schedule an in-person evaluation? I need to see this connection with my own eyes," Mary almost shouted with relief. Running to Ryan's room, she knocked on the door urgently. "Ryan, we have a chance." When she explained about the possibility of an official evaluation, Ryan showed the first positive reaction in weeks. His eyes regained some of the lost sparkle, and he immediately began getting ready to go out. The reunion at the shelter was moving to watch. The moment Ryan appeared in the hallway, the dog literally jumped from the shadows where it was hiding, running to the bars with an energy that no one had seen since the separation. The animal whimpered softly, a sound that Mrs. Lucy later described as the closest to crying that she had ever heard a dog produce. "Hey, buddy," said Ryan with a choked voice, immediately opening the kennel. "I missed you too." Dr. Richard observed in absolute silence as the dog approached Ryan with extreme care, sniffing him completely, as if wanting to make sure he was real. When it finally convinced itself, the animal pressed its entire body against the wheelchair, trembling slightly with emotion. "Is it safe for me to come closer?" asked the veterinarian. "Let me ask him first," replied Ryan, calmly stroking the dog. "Buddy, this is Dr. Richard. He needs to observe us to understand our friendship. Will you let him approach?" The dog looked in the veterinarian's direction, then turned its eyes back to Ryan, as if it were really considering the request. After a few seconds, it moved slightly away from the chair, staying close but allowing space for another person. Dr. Richard approached slowly, observing every detail of the interaction. "Ryan, can you show me how you communicate with him?" For the next hour, Ryan demonstrated the unique language he had developed with the dog. Whispered commands, subtle gestures, and mainly an emotional communication that transcended words. The veterinarian was impressed to see how the animal responded not only to Ryan's commands, but also to his emotional state. "Now watch this," said Ryan, positioning his chair in a specific way. The dog immediately understood the signal and lay down beside him with its head resting in the boy's lap. "He does this when he notices I'm sad or anxious. It's like he knows exactly what I need." Dr. Richard took mental notes of everything he observed. The connection was genuine and deep, but more importantly, it was therapeutic for both. The dog showed no sign of aggression in Ryan's presence, and the teenager exhibited confidence and communication skills that clearly developed through this relationship. "Ryan," said the veterinarian finally, "would you like to help other people through this special connection you have with him?" The boy looked surprised. "What do you mean?" There's a therapeutic program here in the city that works with children who have traumas or disabilities. They're always looking for partnerships with specially trained animals. You and your friend here could be perfect for that." Mary felt her heart race. But that would mean that Ryan could officially adopt the dog, formally train it as a therapy animal, and work with us helping other children. It would be a win-win situation. Ryan looked at the dog, which seemed to be paying attention to the conversation. "What do you think, buddy? Want to help other people feel better?" The dog tilted its head and gently licked Ryan's hand, a gesture that everyone interpreted as approval. 2 weeks later, Ryan was in a room full of children with different disabilities and traumas, introducing his canine companion who now had an official name, Hope. The name had come naturally during the adoption process, when Ryan realized that was exactly what the dog had brought to his life. "This is Hope," said Ryan to a group of 5 children who observed him with curiosity. "She was also once very sad and scared, like some of you might feel sometimes." A girl of about 8 years old, who was in a wheelchair similar to Ryan's, timidly raised her hand. "Won't she try to hurt me?" "No," Ryan answered kindly. "I'll tell you a secret. When I met her, she was very afraid of people, and I was afraid of everything too. But you know what we discovered? Sometimes when 2 people are afraid, they can join together and become braver." Hope approached the girl slowly, exactly as she had done with Ryan at their first meeting. When the child hesitantly extended her hand and touched the soft fur, her eyes lit up with the same glow that Ryan had experienced months before. "She's warm," said the girl, smiling for the first time since she had arrived at the session. Ryan observed the scene with a feeling of profound fulfillment. He had found not only his own healing, but a greater purpose. The pain of his accident hadn't disappeared, but now it had meaning. Each emotional scar he carried became a tool to help others find their own way back to life. Mary, observing from a distance, couldn't contain her tears of pride. Her son, who had been lost in the darkness of trauma, had not only found the light again, but now shared it with others who walked through the same dark tunnel. That night at home, Ryan sat in the garden with Hope by his side, watching the stars. "You know what I learned?" he said, stroking the dog's fur. "Sometimes we need to break a little to discover how to be truly strong." Hope looked at him with those wise eyes that seemed to understand every word, and Ryan knew that regardless of the challenges that would still come, they would face everything together. 2 hearts that recognized each other in pain and chose to heal through love. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Ryan and Hope's story has deeply touched your hearts. This journey of healing, overcoming, and discovering purpose through genuine connection reminds us that sometimes the most transformative encounters happen in the most unexpected moments. If this narrative moved you as much as it moved us in telling it, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Leave a like if you believe, as Ryan discovered, that our true strength is born not from our perfections, but from our ability to transform wounds into wisdom. And in the comments, share with us your own experiences of connections that changed your lives. Every day we bring narratives that explore the silent miracles that happen when 2 hearts recognize each other. Don't forget to activate notifications to be the first to hear our next exciting journeys. Until next time, and remember, sometimes it's in the most unlikely connections that we find our own hope.